All right, guys, welcome back. How are you all doing this week? Getting close to the end of the semester. Exams coming up. All right, let's not talk about that. Looks like Sarah's just joining. All right. And guys, just because this is going to be the last time that I'm going to see you guys this semester, so I'll just say one more time regarding honors. So if you're not sure about what you want to do next year, or you need like an extra year maybe to get your GPA up, if you want to get into medicine or do like some master's courses, honors is a really good opportunity. Again, Sarah's the one to email if you're interested in doing honors in our unit. So just like kind of human-based research. Otherwise, you guys know that you can contact a range of supervisors, and even just their, maybe they have their own PhD students as well. You can contact them if you want to, as kind of like a proxy, if you're also interested in maybe just getting more information. So at this point, you don't need to have anything decided about next year, but if it's something that you're even remotely interested in, just keep in mind that all you really need to do is set a tentative email, introduce yourself, and just say like, look, I'm interested in like the subject that I did with you this semester. Maybe they were your demonstrator or your lecturer or something, and just ask them like how can I go about doing a honors project in this area, and they'll be happy to give you full instructions. So that's all I'll say about that, guys. Obviously, you have other priorities at this point. You've got exams coming up, end of semester, very stressful as always. But just, yeah, this is just the last opportunity I'm going to get to see you guys. So just thought I had to mention that. Sarah, if you're here, I don't know if you want to say hi or if you're just happy for me to get started.
Yep, please get started, Luke, and hello, everyone. Thank you, Luke.
No worries. All right, let's get into it. So memory systems and learning today, guys. So you had your lecture on this last week. I had a brief look at it. So as usual, this is just going to be mostly revision. So as usual, we're going to go through some Zoom polls and stuff just to get some, give you guys a little bit of a chance to, I guess, like demonstrate or practice some of your learning so far. And here we go, learning. What is learning? So this is just a couple of definitions. I wanted to make sure you guys just had these written down somewhere. So if, you know, maybe you're getting terms mixed up, they're all here. So learning is basically acquiring new knowledge or skills. Memory is retaining that learned information. And we broadly categorize it into short-term and long-term. So short-term is talking about like a time scale of like minutes to seconds, maybe even hours. So outside of that, short-term memory isn't super helpful. And long-term memory is where you're able to store information for on a time scale of hours to days, even longer than that, up to the point where some of your long-term memories will literally last you your entire lifetime. So disregarding things like degenerative disorders, which might like impact your memory, there's some things that you would just literally never forget. For example, like your name, your childhood, you'll largely remember large chunks of your childhood, just because it is stored in your cerebral cortex. So it has like widespread area in which it is stored in. Consolidation, we talk about a little bit. So consolidation is basically the process of forming stable long-term memories. And there's three sort of key areas which are going to enhance that process. So the first one is excitement. So if you have an emotional attachment or like an interest in like a subject, whether it be something as simple as like learning to juggle or learning about like our country's history, if you have an emotional attachment or association with those, it is going to increase your consolidation of those memories. You're going to retain that information more readily. Second one, rehearsal. So, which is basically repetition or rehearsal, is another way of retaining things. So this is why we like sometimes you'll see, particularly in teaching, like in first year subjects, they might say like, after your lecture, within 24 hours, you should go home and revise what you learned that day, or maybe do it within the next day. And the reason that's really important is that research shows that rehearsal within like 24 hours is really, really good for retention. And then even like, yeah, little things like just going over the notes that you took during your lecture, or just flicking through the lecture slides again after the fact can be really helpful for retaining stuff. And then finally, the best one by far is association of new information with pre-existing information. So basically, things that you already know about is what it means by pre-existing data. So if you are associating new skills or new information with things that you already know, that is going to be incredibly helpful for retaining that new information. It's one of the best ways that you can try to remember something. And on the right here, you just have a diagram that is showing your basically sensory receptors are used to pick up information from our environment, and then we have this temporary storage of that information in the cerebral cortex. And for the most part, your memory retention is this yellow and green box. So you have a short-term memory phase and then a long-term memory phase. And your consolidation is affected by excitement, rehearsal, and association. And then retrieving those memories is also quite important, which we'll get into a little bit later. So I mentioned that long-term memory is one of your broad categories, and within that you have two smaller categories. So you have declarative memories and non-declarative. Those are your two types of long-term memory. So declarative memories are also known as explicit memories. They are basically just facts and events, and the best way to remember them is that it is information that you can declare. So if I were to ask you to, what are your memories of your wedding day? What are your memories of, or I'd ask you to describe what was your last birthday like? You have to declare to me what that was like. There's no other way that that sort of information can be manifested. So the fact that you're having to declare that is indicative that is a declarative memory. Generally, they are easy to form and easy to forget. So for example, Canberra is the capital of Australia. I'm always forgetting that one, but that is an example of a declarative memory, that piece of information. Non-declarative ones, also known as implicit memories, we focus just on the aspect of that known as procedural memory. So that's just skills and habits. So things that you do autonomously, basically. But there is a branch of non-declarative memories known as classical conditioning, which we don't get into in this subject. So we basically just do declarative versus procedural. Those are just the two things that we're really interested in. Procedural memories generally require practice and repetition, and they are difficult to forget in general. So tying a shoelace, never going to forget how to do that, and riding a bike. Cool. All right, so I'll go ahead and start the first poll. This one is basically just a sort of rapid fire thing for you guys to do. So there's 3 questions that I want all of you to answer. First one is just bowling a cricket ball. Is that an example of procedural or declarative? And then I'll get you guys to do the same for the other 2 questions. Just while you're going through that, I'll just read out what Sarah said. So she said the honours info session will be held on Thursday, the 15th. So that's next week from today, from 4:30 to 6 p.m. I believe, Sarah, that is straight after their exam. So I think instead of having the tutorial next week in this time slot, you just have your exam instead. So that should end around 3:50 or 4 o'clock. And then if you guys are feeling up to it, the honour session will be half an hour after that. So starting from 4:30.
Yep, that's correct, Luke. Yep, that's correct.
Cool. All right. 80% of you voted. Yep, awesome. So we're gonna end the poll there. Again, guys, this is just practice basically. So for you guys to have a go at demonstrating your knowledge of this so far. I'm gonna have to do this. It's been a nightmare trying to get this to show up on the recorded lecture, but here it is, the results of the poll. So yeah, wow, awesome. So the first one, procedural, 94% of you would be correct. The second one, reciting the names of all your past high school teachers, an example of what it is declarative. It's something that you have to declare. And another indicative thing of that is that it's something that you generally won't forget. Like it's hard to sort of forget something like that. And finally, brushing your teeth in the morning is an example of what it's procedural. So other things that would help you to come to that conclusion is that it's something you do autonomously. And it's also a physical movement. A lot of like physical movement-based things tend to be procedural. So it's about like putting together the clues, the bits of information that you have, and trying to know whether it's procedural or declarative. But for the most part, you guys are doing really good. Seems like you understand that pretty well. So we can move on. All right, these questions are straight from your lab book. So we're just going to go through them together. Driving a car is part of your what? It is, for the most part, your procedural. So again, think of it as something that you're physically having to move to do. It's something you do autonomously. So you get in the driver's seat, close the door, everything from like turning the wheel to changing gears and that kind of thing. That's all procedural based. The only time that you might consider that it would be an example of both is if you're reading and interpreting street signs. So that's something where you're having to, for example, you see a sign that you haven't seen before and you're having to retrieve declarative memories. And the reason they're declarative is because, for example, you saw not a stop sign because that's an obvious one, maybe like a speed bump or something. No one ever pays attention to the speed bump signs, but you see it and then you have to think, oh, okay, that means there's a speed bump coming up. I need to slow down. Yeah, so a small aspect of driving is technically declarative. I would say for the most part, if you got this question and you had to guess, you would say procedural. That would be the right answer. Next question, consolidation requires short-term memory. That's actually false. So I believe the primary mechanism for consolidation is requires short-term memory and then into long-term memory, but it's not necessary. You can sort of bypass your short-term memory phase and consolidate long-term memories without it, basically. Long-term memory is a category of what? This question makes absolutely no sense, but it's from the lab manual, so we'll go through it anyway. I believe because long-term memory is the broader one, so procedural and declarative are both aspects of long-term memory. So saying long-term memory is a category of either of them isn't accurate at all. I think what it should say is procedural memory is a category of short-term or long-term, and the answer would be long-term. But just for you guys to know, if you saw this question, the answer is procedural. But I don't think it's going to come up. All right, next poll. So the inability to form new memories following brain trauma is what? So I've launched that poll so you guys can go take a stab at it now. You should remember from your lecture differences between antero and retro. So antero meaning after. Retro is like, you know, like something retro is like old school, so it means before. So maybe retrograde means like inability to remember things before the incident. Sounds about right. And anterograde is the inability to form new memories, maybe. Just giving away the answer. I'll end it there, share results. I'm not going to share those ones on the screen. 100% of you got that one right. It is anterograde. It is A. So you guys are paying attention in the lecture, which is really good to see. Moving on. Okay, so Hebbian theory. So Hebb proposed that representation of an object consists of all the cortical neurons simultaneously activated by this stimulus. This group of active cells were called what? It's called a cell assembly. So Hebbian theory is actually quite a broad, like, school of thought. And his theory was that brain synaptic connections are strengthened when the firing of the presynaptic neuron continuously causes the firing of the postsynaptic neuron. So you have like really strong connection between those two neurons. So to try to give you more information, I guess, like more ways of thinking about the cell assembly, is that it's a group of highly connected neurons, and you only need one sort of one side of like the starting group of them to activate in order to get the full picture. So it's kind of like when you're in a stadium and one of the sections starts a Mexican wave, and then that causes the entire stadium to continue the Mexican wave. So think of that first group of people that are starting it. That is, I guess, one small part of the cell assembly, and then you can think of the entire stadium as the full cell assembly. And the way this works is that it allows you to, for example, perceive only a small part of a stimulus, but still be able to recognize what it is in full. And so this is what gives humans really powerful facial recognition. So if you're only able to see like sort of the eyes or like the top half of someone's face, you're actually still able to recognize who it is. And this is a good way of remembering how cell assembly works, because only able to see a portion of the full stimulus is still activating the full cell assembly. So the part of your brain that is storing your memory of that person's face, like it's your friend, for example, the full thing, the full assembly is being activated, even though you're only seeing part of the stimulus. And that's basically Hebbian theory. And yeah, talked enough about that. So next we have a case study. Not going to start that yet. About HM. So he suffered from seizures from age 10. They were incredibly debilitating. Despite medication, the seizures actually only got worse as he got older. At the age of 27, he underwent a surgery, pretty drastic surgery to try to reduce the seizures. I believe the actual locations that the surgeons decided to remove, they did so with pretty good reason to think that would cure him of his seizures, basically. Otherwise they wouldn't have done it, because they took a lot. So part of his cortex, amygdala, and anterior 2/3 of his hippocampus. So most of his hippocampus got removed during this. And they knew that was going to have severe consequences, but his seizures were just so debilitating that they went for it anyway. So what were the good things about this? So his perception, intelligence, and personality were not affected by the removal of his hippocampus. His long-term memory and working memory were normal. So working memory is like remembering someone's name when you first meet them, or remembering digits. People tend to only be able to recognize like 6, 7, maybe 8 digits. That's your working memory, and it's something that you have to kind of continuously work on, or like put work into, in order to retain that information. It's almost like a facet of short-term memory, and it has lots in common with short-term memory. But that was all fine for him. He could still learn procedural tasks if he practiced. So they obviously he had to spend a lot of his life after this surgery just in full like rehabilitation. I actually don't know if he was ever able to leave the hospital, because he had like other problems. But what they did was they gave him a maze every day to do. So I believe it was just like a 2-dimensional maze, start to finish. And what happened was he was given the task every day, and he couldn't remember doing the maze the previous day, but he would get better at it every day somehow. They weren't sure how. And they figured that it was because his procedural memory was still functional, and he was able to almost like remember the physical movements of completing the maze, but he couldn't, for example, declare how to finish that maze, because that was the thing he was missing. So the bad, it caused extreme anterograde amnesia. So antero meaning after the fact. So after his surgery, he couldn't form new memories. But it was particularly new declarative memories. So he couldn't, for example, remember someone he met 5 minutes ago. He would meet them, could have a full conversation with them, and then 5 minutes later, he would have absolutely no memory of it, because those are aspects of declarative memory, meeting people, events, facts, that kind of thing. That's all declarative. So none of that, he was able to form new examples of that. And again, that's why he couldn't remember doing the maze, this maze they gave him every day. He couldn't remember like finishing it. But it was, the reason he got better at it was because his procedural learning was intact. And he underestimated his age. Yeah, that's a really unfortunate part. So he would basically look in the mirror every day and not understand why he would be getting older. And he would constantly underestimate his age. Couldn't recognize a current picture of himself. Yeah, that's also quite sad. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the last poll. There we go. So the question is, the removal of HM's hippocampus had various consequences. Based on how he was affected, which of the following do you think the hippocampus is required for? So just based on this case study. So do you think it was important in determining his personality? Do you think it was important in retrieving long-term memories? Do you think it was important in forming new procedural memories? Or do you think it was important in forming new declarative memories? Just while you guys are still voting, I'll just read out what Sarah has said here. So procedural memories are memory for skills, behaviors, and habits. Declarative memory are memory for facts and events. Interesting fact. It's about a case study of a man who could recite a list of 70 things. It might be a shopping list. It might be a list of audience members' names. So they could all write their name down on a piece of paper, 70 names, give it to him. He could read it once, throw the piece of paper away, and then recite them from scratch. So his memory was so incredible that he could remember just huge lists of things.
Yeah, and look, they really couldn't identify what the main reason was and what was actually happening at an anatomical level or a physiological level, but they attributed it to multimodal coding of memories and that he was remarkably maybe forming more synapses, etc. But the downside was that he wouldn't forget things either, which means that there were many things that he wanted to forget and that he wouldn't be able to forget that. So things that would depress him or make him anxious or stressed, etc. So it wasn't the best state to be in. But he actually went on to be a stage performer, and then he would be able to recite all these things that people would tell him and read it out to them. And yeah, he probably made quite a bit of money from that as well.
As a stage performer, yeah. Well, there's that, I suppose. So yeah, we've got the results of the poll here. So 82% of you forming new declarative memories. Yeah, that was his main issue. So the case of HM suggests that the hippocampus is requiring for acquiring new memories. So think of it as like everything you see, taste, touch, all that information that you're perceiving, that is being processed by the hippocampus. And without that, you're not able to store or like take in new information. But importantly, the hippocampus is not responsible for long-term memory retrieval. So his long-term memory was fine. He could remember who he is, he could remember his childhood, and that's why his personality wasn't affected. So all of that is stored in your cerebral cortex in various regions. It's not located to this small organ. The hippocampus is quite small, and we'd be in a lot of trouble without it. But certainly personality, intelligence, your ability to perceive things, not affected by the hippocampus.
Yep, and look, just because, instance, you should note that because the hippocampus is also linked to your HPA axis, which is your stress cycle there, people who are excessively stressed, are regularly depressed, have regular levels of anxiety, will generally have issues with their memory in the long term, especially if it leads to chronic stress, because your hippocampal cells are dying, and the hippocampus is quite important for memory. Thank you.
Yeah, it can be quite hard. All right, so this is, just one more question on HM. So the removal of much of the temporal lobes mostly affected his declarative memories. Again, that was just straight in the case study. So you guys will, did it fix these seizures? Yeah, I'm pretty sure it did fix these seizures. The surgeons knew that removing that much of brain tissue, especially that much of his hippocampus, was going to cause huge problems with him. So they wouldn't have done it unless they were pretty much certain that it was going to fix his seizures. Perhaps they were able to like a combination of EEG monitoring and maybe like some deep tissue electrical monitoring, maybe they were able to realize that those specific areas were where his seizures were originating from. I can't imagine that they would just go chopping bits of his brain off without knowing for sure that it was going to stop his seizures. So for the most part, yeah, I'm pretty sure it fixed his seizures, but he was just left with, 5-minute memory. All right, we have another case study. So yeah, this should be fairly common. So it's important that you guys start getting familiar with breaking down what's important in these case studies, what's important information, what's just kind of throwaway. So this is about Troy, who had his head pounded into the ground several times during a football game, and he had to go see a neurologist. He could not remember his name or recognize his parents, but he did remember coming to the doctor's office. Very interesting. So Troy demonstrates, actually none of the above. It's not. Okay, so we'll talk about what retrograde and graded retrograde amnesia are. So retrograde amnesia is usually graded. So graded means the extent, like how far back your memories were affected before the event. So a low graded retrograde amnesia would be like he's only forgetting things like an hour or two before the incident. So maybe he wouldn't remember his football game. Now, he can't remember his name. So that is the most extreme form of graded retrograde amnesia possible. Forgetting who you are, forgetting your parents, forgetting basically all your long-term memory is the most extreme possible thing. And it is incredibly, incredibly rare, especially, well, sorry, I shouldn't say incredibly rare. As a permanent condition, as a permanent loss, it is incredibly, incredibly rare. It is usually, it would have to be like you have like a neurodegenerative disease like Alzheimer's, where tissue is physically being destroyed. Incredibly unlikely that you would have like a head collision and you would forget everything as far back as your entire childhood. Very unlikely. However, so that is one clue that it is not a normal or even graded pattern of retrograde amnesia. And what it is actually transient global amnesia. So not really a fair question because it's none of these. Certainly not anterograde amnesia. It's none of these. So it's transient global amnesia, which is basically a head injury that causes blood loss and or ischemia, so lack of blood flow, and that is causing temporary memory loss. So the areas of your cerebral cortex which store a lot of your important memories, not able to get enough blood flow, and so your memory retrieval is impacted. Yeah, he did remember coming to the doctor's office, so his anterograde, his ability to form new memories does seem okay, so his hippocampus seems fine. The good thing about transient global amnesia is that it's transient, so it's short term, and it is reversible, recovery in about 2 to 8 hours, and yeah, characterized by total disruption of short-term memory with a range of problems retrieving long-term memories. As such, Troy can only remember things from like 5 to 10 minutes ago. So just another little thing for you guys to remember, just another type of amnesia that is somewhat common. And yeah, okay, moving on. What are the 3 regions of the diencephalon that are involved in the processing of recognition memory? So yeah, they're here. If it comes up in the exam, they're here. So 3 regions of the diencephalon. You have your anterior nuclei, your dorsomedial nuclei, and your mammillary bodies. So just something to remember. If it comes up in exam, here it is. Just have these slides ready, I guess. Question 9, what depletion or deficiency can lead to structural brain damage, which produces Korsakoff syndrome? So it is thiamine deficiency. I think this question, sometimes the pharmacology students know this one immediately. I think maybe it comes up in pharmacology. Question 10, so the radial arm maze. This was an experiment, well, is an experiment where you have these 8 arms arrayed in a radial pattern, so just in a circle. And what they did is they drop a piece of food into the end of each arm, and each arm is connected to a central tunnel. So you drop the rat in, and a healthy rat on its first time in the radial arm maze will smell that there's food everywhere, and it will basically just run to the end of each tunnel, grab the food, run back to the central tunnel, And it will do that for all 8 arms, and then it will even double back. So it'll even check ones that it has been to before, and that's just because it's not, it's dropped into a dark cave, and so it just wants to find all the food and then get out of there. What they found, though, is interestingly, if you keep dropping the same rat into the same tunnel, keep putting the food in each arm, it will learn to only check each arm once. So it's starting to remember where the food is, and you can do other cool things like just drop food into specific arms. So you can just drop it into, say, this north pole and this south pole or arm, and it will just learn to, with repetition, it will just learn to check those 2 arms. And that is an example of spatial working memory. So that is your ability to remember. It's kind of like a combination of spatial awareness and your ability to retain information of your environment, and it's taking in a range of perceptions in order to get this working. It is the domain of the hippocampus. So what they found is that rats who had lesions in their hippocampus, meaning that they basically had reduced function of their hippocampus, they weren't able to get better at this maze. So they would, for the rest of their lifespans, treat this maze as if it was, every time they got put into it, they would treat it as if they were being introduced into it for the first time. So they would keep doubling back. They would keep basically checking arms that they'd already been into. And it's just a little experiment to investigate how or what, like, where spatial working memory originates in the brain. And Sarah just said in the chat, just an interesting fact, quoting Herben Ebbinghaus, left to itself, every mental content gradually loses its capacity for being revived. Facts crammed at examination time soon vanish. So her take is, let us learn and not cram. Good quote. All right, moving on. Information processing from short-term memory to long-term memory can be enhanced by what? So if you remember from the start of this, it was association of old and new information. So it's certainly not A, because that's the opposite. It was also being excited was another way of retaining information. So a calm disposition, not necessarily going to help with consolidation. And so that must be C, rehearsal and repetition. Really good ways of consolidating short-term memories into long-term memories. What's the difference between declarative and spatial? So I would say that spatial working is more so to do with working memory, and that has more in common with your short-term memory, whereas declarative is most definitely an aspect of long-term memory. I would say that's kind of the main difference. But I can understand why you might think that, like, yeah, if the rat's declarative memory is fine, why isn't it able to still complete the maze? And it's probably just because it's a heavy focus on the environment, like the spatial awareness, the spatial working memory of the rat. That's kind of just the main difference. Brain structures that are involved in procedural memory include what? So it is the association cortex, your basal nuclei, your thalamus, your premotor cortex, and your dopamine producing neurons, or your dopaminergic neurons. Again, it's just kind of there. Like, if you get this question, I'm not expecting you guys to remember this off by heart, but if you get this question and you want to what are the anatomical things related to procedural memory, it's here. It's at the end of this slide, actually. And yeah, so that's the end of that's all I have left, you guys. That's all the content. And I guess we still have a little bit of time. Maybe I can just talk about how I think you should study, because next week is going to be, instead of this time slot, you'll just have your exam. So leave the full hour to be able to do it. But it should only take you, I think, 40 minutes. And my content isn't going to be in that exam. So the online neuroscience tutorials aren't part of next week's exam, but all my content is going to be important for the final exam. So just...
Yeah, so look, just to point out, for the anatomy exam that's coming up next week, you should, well, you've been attending the face-to-face anatomy prac, that will be helpful. I mean, if you haven't been attending that, for those who have not been able to because they're either overseas, whatever, you can also rely on the material we've provided online to learn for that exam. So all your Ackland's video material, as well as all the other material that we've put out there for Ackland. So it's mainly focusing on anatomy component of the course. Some students have been asking me, will the physiology get examined? Well, a physiology could be linked to an anatomy. So it's hard to separate them out completely, but the main focus is anatomy, okay? But you need to understand your basic physiology to be able to answer some of the questions that the anatomy exam will pose.
Yeah.
So
yeah, they might find the first tutorial that they did with me might be helpful for that, where we just did anatomy.
Yes. So yeah, look at those tutorials and just know your physiological basis generally, but focus on the anatomy components that we've been teaching you, and you should be okay for that exam. It's not a difficult exam.
No. I'm going to post all the information there. So that's just copied and pasted from Blackboard. Everyone has probably seen it already, but just in case you guys haven't. So the exam's next Thursday, 15th, 3 till 3:50. So you need to allocate around 50 minutes to do it. And then straight after that at 4:30 is the honors information session. It's just a Zoom link, so you just click on the link and attend the meeting. Basically, should be really good. Sarah, do you know at all if is it hosted by the honors committee? Are they just like, is it going to be like Naja and such, just talking a little bit about honors? Or I haven't heard too much about what's going to be involved. I assume it'll be something like that.
Yes, so they're hoping that some of the academics will become available via Zoom to be able to actually propose their topics. But there are so many academics in the school, and not everyone will probably attend that session to talk about their projects.
Yeah.
For example, I might not be able to attend myself, but if you're interested in honors in the various areas that the academics are offering, please do not hesitate to drop them an email directly. And also note that academics will get fairly filled out with their honors intake. So if they're only intending to take 1 or 2, try to get in early if you can. We also have a honors abstract booklet there somewhere on the website for science, for the School of Life Sciences. So go looking at that. It's got the abstracts of the different types of projects available. But some academics have probably not made it to the abstract booklet yet, but they're still offering projects. So once again, don't hesitate to contact them directly. Yep.
Okay. Sure, this might be it. I'm not sure if that's from this year, so I'm not going to post that. But I think you guys should just be able to look up honors abstract and executive summary for 2020. And you should be able to find it online.
Yeah. So we'll stay for another 5 minutes or so. If you've got any questions about any lecture topic, or for that matter, any tutorial topic, please drop us an email now, or anything about the anatomy exam. Don't hesitate. We are in the process of marking your digital media project. It was very fascinating for me to look through most of them. We're sharing the marking, but at the same time, I'm trying to look at all of them. You all have put in such a great effort. Thank you very much. Very interesting to actually listen to those digital media project and watch the videos.
All right, yeah. That's pretty much all we have to say for today. Yeah, as I say, guys, so this is the end of me. You'll actually don't even know if you have any more lectures after this. I think they're done with lectures as well.
Some questions are coming through, Luke. Did you want to read them out?
I'll read them out. Okay, so hi Sarah, I've read the exam details that you posted. Will some of the questions involve identifying a marked structure and then selecting the correct option? I believe that's a yes.
From what I recall, I did not see any illustrations in the actual exam questions, but I will confirm that with an online announcement, whether or not we will use any illustrations in the exam. Good question, student.
Okay. So
Mark, it was Mark, actually. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. And then will we be given photographs of the various body parts we use in the lab classes or photos from elsewhere? So yeah, Sarah's just basically saying no, she's not aware of any illustrations, but it's more so that you will be required to know your anatomy in other ways. So for example, if you've got a question that was you know, patient X has a lesion in the occipital region, which sense is most likely to be affected, something along those lines.
And know about your cranial nerves and so forth,
Yep.
the different lobes of the brain. These are multiple choice questions. So, and I have not seen too many illustrations being used in these questions at this particular point in time, but I will go and relook at that, and I will definitely make an announcement about that online to just make it easier for you to study.
Yeah. And then just to answer the last part of the question, so will questions then follow about the functions of the structure that we identified? So yeah, any time that we like expect you to know a structure, we almost always expect you to also understand the function associated with it. And I mean, I always find that easier to remember anyway. If I have to be learning, you know, what do all these cranial nerves do? I usually find it helpful to at least associate part of what's in the name with their function. Like oculomotor is the cranial nerve that moves or has motor control over your eye muscles, that kind of thing. And yeah, it's because we also can ask you, you know, if this person had this a lesion in this cranial nerve 9 or whatever, what might you expect in terms of behavior or function, that kind of thing.
Some student has just asked, will we be able to check our previous questions once we proceed to the next one, or do we get one chance to submit an answer for the online practical test? Yeah, the letter is correct, Jaden. You will not be able to, unfortunately, go back and check your previous question. The fact that it is online and open book, that is as stringent as we could make it. So yes, you can't go back to check a question, but you can continue to proceed on. So be very careful before you move on to the next one. Just make sure you're happy with the answer. That said, do not spend too much time on one question that you don't end up finishing the exam.
Yeah, I would definitely say that because of that, guys. If you get stuck on a question, you're going to have to make that decision. Is it worth? You've really only got 1 minute per question. And if you start spending, you know, 2 minutes, 3 minutes just stuck on one question, and you're scrolling through the lecture slides, you can't find where exactly it was mentioned, the answer to the question, then it, you know, at that point you have to make the decision, I should probably move on. But other than that, 50 multiple choice questions, 15 minutes is pretty standard. So yeah, definitely. Thanks, Mark. And then for the final, is there any advice on how to narrow down content we should know offhand for the exam? Is there, what should we know offhand without having to look at our notes? So I would say like general concepts that I've talked about, in general, like how do the diffuse modulatory systems work? Well, there are, you know, I use the analogy of dropping oil into a river, and then that oil then spreads out over the ocean and spreads that oil into lots of different ecosystems. That's how your neurotransmitters are used to flood the brain in the diffuse modulatory systems. So as long as you understand all the general concepts, you're not going to be thrown too much by the little things. And the little things I mean by, like, you know, I had those 3 questions where it was like, you know, is this an example of procedural or declarative? So you guys should be pretty familiar by now by procedural is something that is like innate, it's autonomous, it's hard to forget, and declarative is kind of the opposite. It's easy to form memories, easy to forget, and they're things that you just say out loud.
And Luke, just to answer Miriam also directly, thanks for the question, Miriam. Yes, you must know the content, because think about it this way. If you don't know the content, even if you have hordes of notes in front of you, how much time will you be able to spend going through all those notes looking for the answer? So literally, you should know the content so that you're able to answer it without having to refer to the notes all the time, even though it's an open book exam. Look, I've done law as well as science, and in law, you could take in as many textbooks as you like and everything and anything under the sun, the kitchen sink included, maybe just an exaggeration. But you wouldn't have the time to spend to actually go through the notes, because by the time you did that, the time would be over. So refer to it occasionally when you need to, but I'm hoping that you will actually learn and know the information so you can go through the exam more smoothly and not get flustered flicking through pages.
Yeah, it is a lot of it's a lot of lecture slides and a lot of my slides to sort of have open, to have on hand, and be trying to flick through. So yeah, it would definitely be tricky, especially if you're kind of second guessing yourself and you want to go double check the answer. It's going to take more than a minute if you're trying to do each question, to double check where exactly in the lecture it mentioned something. Yeah, and not every question is going to be cut and dry where the answer is literally just on the lecture slide. So you have to allow time for yourself to think about the question, maybe interpret something you remembered from the lecture, and then be able to apply it to the question. So yeah, it's difficult to give advice on, but yeah, I agree with Sarah that you do need to know the content. And it is a
So for
content
the final exam, yeah, just sorry, Luke, just for the final exam for the students, yeah, learn the material, and I'm hoping that we will have some true false type questions in there together with the multiple choice questions. The MCQs will generally be 5 options. An occasional true and false question will also be thrown in. Look, last session, students were online, the exams were online, and everyone was doing rather well. So don't get too concerned. As long as you're studying and learning and following this with us, you should all be quite okay.
Yep. All right. No, thank you guys. You've been great this semester. Yeah, thanks for continuing to show up, even towards the very end of the semester. I know motivation levels run low near the end, but it's really good having you guys to show up, because otherwise we wouldn't have these Zoom polls.
Yes, and we hope we've made it interesting for you.
Yeah.
I asked Luke to throw in a few interactive things, and he did the little Zoom poll, which I thought was very nice. And if you all have any other queries, questions, issues along the way, please don't hesitate to email any of us, including myself and also Taryn Chalmers, who's been looking after you all as well. And if you have specific questions about a particular lecture, please don't hesitate to also email that lecturer directly. You can also copy me on so I can also give you my 2 bobs worth. All right, guys, good luck with your exams that are coming up, but we hope to see you around.
Of course.
Catch you around.
Thanks very much, guys. Good luck. Good luck with all the other subjects as well. Thanks, guys. See ya.